When you're structuring your speech, you need to again consider that basic structure: introduction, body, conclusion. It's the same that you get in any book, any newspaper article, really any movie, any kind of media at all will contain an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. And your speech is no different. It'll follow the same pattern. You're going to have two types of outlines in this class. The first is a working outline. Often I call this your first draft. So it's a fully written out outline. It has complete sentences. It has the indented formal structure of an outline. So Roman numerals, letters, numbers, indentations, transitions in between. But it's a working outline. It means it's a draft. It's going to change. It's going to possibly be edited. Now, you should put your best effort into this, because if you get it exactly right, then you're not going to have to make any changes for the formal outline. But the first draft that you send in, your working outline, is for me to give you feedback on and let you know if you're in the right direction. Then you tighten it up, you fix anything that you need to do. That's your formal outline. That's what you rehearse with until you feel comfortable moving on to your speaking notes. So speaking notes then, there's two different ways of doing speaking notes, whichever you are more comfortable with. The first is a keyword outline, meaning that you condense those full sentences that you wrote for your working and formal outline into just keywords and phrases. So you shorten it up. This might be the outline that you're most familiar with seeing, just little bullet points, keywords. That's not a formal outline, that's speaking notes. You can also then transfer that onto note cards. But again, you don't want to have complete sentences, because it really doesn't make any sense for me to have you use your computer to type out a full outline and be able to have the technology of a printer print it out or submit it. It doesn't make sense to ask you then to just transfer that by hand onto small sheets of paper. So I don't want you to do that. I don't want you writing full sentences out on your speaking notes. Instead, I want you to write out keywords and phrases that you put on your note cards, and they just simply remind you of what you want to say. They are not something that you're reading from or looking at all the time. In terms of organizing the body, as I said, later we'll go over different organizational patterns, and your book talks about a few. But in general, for most of your speeches, you just want to think about the most logical order. What makes the most sense? Now let's talk a little bit about planning your introduction. There are several functions to the introduction. You want to get your audience's attention, give them a reason to listen. Why is this relevant? You set the tone for the topic and the setting. You want to establish your qualifications, that you are a credible source of information, that people can trust you because you know a little something about this topic. You want to introduce your thesis that you've already come up with and preview the main points of your presentation. Now, setting the tone for the topic and setting isn't actually a statement that you're going to make out loud. So you're not going to say, the tone of this presentation is very serious because blah, blah, blah. You don't need to say that, but your voice, your eye contact, your facial expressions should mirror that. And most of the time this isn't a problem. As I spoke about in the facial expressions, the visual aspects of delivery lecture, sometimes people's face and voice don't match the topic that they're talking about. For instance, I've had someone do a speech over the death penalty, and some of her anxiety around speaking came out in the form of giggling, and it was very off-putting to listen to statistics about death and, this very serious, gruesome topic while someone's smiling and laughing the whole time. It really was incongruent. So the words that you choose, as well as the tone of voice that you have, the facial expressions that you're using, need to reflect what it is you're talking about. If it's a lighthearted, funny topic, feel free to smile and laugh throughout that. That would be appropriate for the topic. But if it's something serious, make sure your word choice and your tone reflects that as well. A couple of different types of opening statements. The worst type of opening statement, let me start with this, that you can do is to just say your name and topic. Hi, my name's Jennifer Gray, and I'm here to tell you about preparing speeches. Let me get started. Okay, that's kind of boring. So instead, you want an attention getter. You can ask a question. This can be a rhetorical question or one that is more of an overt response. In fact, I encourage you to do something rhetorical, meaning you're not actually asking your audience to answer, because that can be quite awkward and take up a long time. So if you have a class of 25 students and you say, "What vacations have you gone on?" And you wait for responses. Could take a while. Instead, you might say something rhetorical like, "Can you picture the best vacation you've ever been on?" So something like that. So something that's more of an overt response. You might tell a story. You might start with, "The best vacation I ever went on was actually not even in this country." I don't know. And then you could start with a quotation. So tell, a saying, a beautiful saying, or a cliche, or something well known, some wisdom, that sort of thing. You might make a startling statement. I always think about it as kind of going along with a question like, "Did you know that 90% of all statistics are made up on the spot?" So something like that. You could refer to the audience or the occasion, kind of depending on what the situation is. Like I think about with this, the way that all weddings start. "We're gathered here today to celebrate the love of this person and that person." So you're referring to the occasion. You might say, something about the speech class even. "When I was first presented with the idea of writing a speech for this class, I was really stumped." And that way you're sort of engaging with the audience because a lot of people will have that similar experience. You can also use humor, though I will caution you about using humor. As someone who uses humor a lot in my face-to-face lectures, and it often falls completely flat and nobody laughs at all, you want to make sure that you feel comfortable using humor and not getting the response that you actually wanted, and that's not going to completely throw you and set your whole speech off on the wrong path. You also want to make sure it's appropriate for the topic, appropriate to the occasion, and appropriate for the audience. So telling a dirty joke, or I've had students tell a kind of dirty joke or like a vulgar joke that had absolutely nothing to do with their topic whatsoever. And it was kind of like, "Let me tell you this gross joke." And then they're like, "Anyway, now I got your attention. Let's talk about microfinance." What? Like, that didn't have anything to do with finance. So why did you tell me that joke? I'm confused now. So you don't want your attention getter to confuse your audience or scare them or weird them out. Just keep it simple. So in the conclusion, as you probably know, the conclusion pretty much mirrors the introduction. You want to review the thesis, what you told the audience about today. You want to summarize the main points. I told you about this, this, and this, and then have some sort of closing statement that gives a favorable impression and provides a sense of completion. You don't want to just cut off abruptly. In fact, I've been thinking about that a lot as I make these videos. And I make these videos from beginning to end, and then I chop them into smaller pieces that's a little bit easier to watch. But as I'm editing them, I realize how abrupt the middle of it sounds. Like if I end after 6 minutes, you probably noticed this, that it sounds like I have something else to say, and that's because I do. I'm going on to the next slide. So I'm trying to get better as I'm recording these lectures at thinking about making a sense of completion, like that video is done. The problem is I'm not exactly sure always where I'm going to cut the video, so I'm going to work on it. But that should give you a good example of how if you don't have a good closing statement, it sounds way too abrupt. So when you're trying to close your speech out, you want to think about the types of techniques that were used for gaining attention, like asking a question or referring back to the audience or referring back to something you said. You could actually do, if it's a persuasive speech, typically you'll have an appeal for action or end with some kind of challenge, like "I challenge each one of you to go donate blood today," something like that. That moves us to transitions. Transitions are meant to promote clarity, emphasize important ideas, and keep your listeners interested. So let them know that the speech is moving on. Some effective transitions might refer to preceding or upcoming ideas. So for instance, for this, I might say, "All right, we've covered introductions and conclusions. Let's move on to transitions." So I referred to what we've already talked about and talked about our upcoming idea. You think of it as a bridge between points. And unlike a traditional transition statement that you might have written for, say, an English essay or something like that, where the transition's quite subtle, in a speech, your transitions need to call attention to themselves because your audience isn't reading your speech. They can't see a break in the text and that you're moving on to a new paragraph. They're waiting to hear it. And so it needs to be quite obvious that you're moving on. So you want to say transition words like next, finally, lastly, moving on, this brings me to. But your transition should be a complete sentence. So don't try to merge it with the main point. Instead, you want to say something like, you could actually just say, this brings me to my next point. So actually audibly make sure to say your transition. And that concludes our discussion of the introduction, conclusion, and transition. See what I did there?